You feel it every day. That quiet pressure in the back of your mind. The sense that something in your life is standing still while time continues moving forward without permission. Plans remain plans. Intentions remain intentions. And somewhere inside, a man knows that waiting has slowly become a habit. Not because he is incapable, but because movement demands friction. Discomfort is not the problem. Inaction is, and life does not repair itself while a man stands still. Lesson 1. Stop waiting. Start moving. Your life will not fix itself begins with a simple observation that most men quietly avoid. Waiting feels responsible. Waiting feels controlled. Waiting feels like you are thinking things through. But in most lives, waiting slowly becomes a disguised form of surrender. A man tells himself he will start when the moment is right, when he has more certainty, when the situation is clearer, when the conditions improve, when he feels ready. But life rarely produces these perfect moments. It produces friction instead. Days pass quietly, then months, eventually years. Nothing dramatic happens. That is the problem. The damage of waiting is rarely loud. It is slow, invisible, almost polite. A man wakes up each morning believing there is still time to begin tomorrow. But tomorrow is a fragile promise. History has already tested this pattern. The men who move rarely have perfect clarity. The men who wait rarely receive it. Movement produces information. Waiting produces speculation. Think about the situations where hesitation enters your life. A decision about work, a conversation that needs to happen, a project that remains in your head but never enters the world. What usually stops the first step? It is not lack of intelligence. It is not lack of opportunity. It is the quiet belief that time will somehow organize the situation for you. But time organizes nothing for the man who refuses to move. Time simply continues forward, carrying consequences with it. Problems mature while a man debates whether he should begin addressing them. And the longer he waits, the heavier the first step begins to feel. This is the first truth most men eventually discover. Action rarely becomes easier through delay. It becomes heavier. A man who delays the gym feels the weight of starting. A man who delays the conversation feels the weight of speaking. A man who delays the project feels the weight of beginning. Waiting does not preserve energy. Waiting multiplies resistance. Stop waiting. Start moving. Your life will not fix itself is not a motivational slogan. It is a description of how life behaves. Life responds to motion. It reveals paths only after the first step exists. Clarity does not arrive before movement. Clarity is born from it. Look closely at the men who seem decisive. From the outside, they appear confident, almost certain. But certainty was not their starting point. It was the result of repeated motion. They moved, they adjusted, they moved again. Meanwhile, the man who waits studies possibilities like a map he never walks. The strange irony is that waiting often feels safer. Movement exposes uncertainty. Movement exposes mistakes. Movement forces a man to see where he stands. But stillness has its own price, a quieter one. When a man refuses to move, life begins to move around him. Opportunities pass through the room without stopping. Other men take steps he once imagined taking himself. Doors close quietly while he studies whether he should approach them. The world does not pause to accommodate hesitation. Movement creates momentum. That is the first principle. The first step is rarely impressive. It is often awkward, incomplete, even slightly embarrassing. But it breaks the illusion that thinking alone can move a life forward. Stop waiting. Start moving. Your life will not fix itself begins exactly there. Not with confidence, not with perfect direction, with motion. And the moment a man accepts this, something subtle begins to shift inside his mind. Lesson 2. Stop waiting. Start moving. Your life will not fix itself also exposes something most men prefer not to examine. Comfort has a cost. Not the obvious comfort of rest after effort, but the quiet comfort of staying where nothing challenges you. At first, it feels harmless. A man settles into routines that require very little from him, the same days, the same reactions, the same small circle of decisions that never force him to confront the larger questions of his life. Everything appears stable. But stability without movement slowly becomes stagnation. The strange part is that comfort rarely announces its danger. It arrives politely. It allows a man to keep functioning while slowly removing the tension that once pushed him forward. The discomfort that once forced growth disappears, and in its place comes something far more dangerous: numbness. Days feel manageable. Weeks pass without friction. Nothing collapses. Nothing demands change. And that is exactly how years disappear. Many men believe their life will eventually demand action from them, that some external moment will arrive and force them to move. But life rarely interrupts comfort unless the consequences have already matured. A business does not collapse overnight. A body does not weaken in a single day. A man's discipline does not vanish in one decision. It fades quietly while comfort becomes normal. Look closely at how routine can harden a life. The same environment, the same excuses, the same promises that tomorrow will be different. But tomorrow arrives with the same conditions because nothing in the man has moved. The mind becomes skilled at protecting this pattern. It produces reasons that sound logical. Now is not the right time. Things will calm down soon. I just need a little more preparation. But preparation without movement slowly becomes delay. Stop waiting. Start moving. Your life will not fix itself forces a man to see what comfort is doing to him. Comfort is not neutral. It shapes behavior. It trains the mind to accept less effort. It dulls the instinct to confront difficulty. And once that instinct fades, the first step becomes harder to take. This is why so many men remain in situations they quietly dislike, jobs that drain them, habits that weaken them, environments that shrink their sense of direction. Nothing dramatic is happening, so they tolerate it. But tolerance slowly becomes identity. The body adjusts to inactivity. The mind adjusts to hesitation. The will adjusts to smaller demands. A man who once imagined movement begins to defend his stillness. And if someone confronts him, he will often explain why waiting is reasonable. Time has proven this pattern many times. A man rarely collapses because life was too difficult. More often, he fades because life became too comfortable. Comfort whispers that nothing urgent needs to happen today. But the cost accumulates silently. This is why the title is not a suggestion. Stop waiting. Start moving. Your life will not fix itself is a correction to a dangerous illusion. Life does not drift toward improvement through comfort. Comfort slows motion. Motion creates life. The moment a man begins to see this clearly, comfort stops feeling safe. It starts feeling expensive. Lesson 3. The first truth was that waiting multiplies resistance. The second revealed that comfort quietly hardens a man into stillness. The third truth moves deeper into the title. Stop waiting. Start moving. Your life will not fix itself. Most men believe they must first understand where they are going before they begin moving. But life rarely offers that sequence. Men wait for clarity, as if it were a signal that arrives before action. They sit with plans in their head, analyzing possibilities, imagining outcomes, adjusting details that exist only in thought. Hours of thinking create the feeling of progress, yet nothing in the real world has changed. It feels responsible to wait for clarity. But clarity is not produced in stillness. Look at any real movement in life. A man changes careers. A man builds something new. A man repairs a broken direction. Did he begin with perfect understanding? Almost never. He began with partial information and a decision to step forward anyway. Clarity grows from friction. When a man moves, the world answers him. Feedback appears, obstacles appear, opportunities appear. Information that was invisible while he was thinking becomes visible through experience. But that information only reveals itself once motion begins. Stillness keeps everything theoretical. This is why hesitation often disguises itself as intelligence. A man believes he is being careful. He believes he is being strategic. In reality, he may simply be protecting himself from the discomfort of beginning without certainty. But certainty is a reward, not a starting point. The mind prefers the illusion of control. If everything is planned perfectly, perhaps mistakes can be avoided. Perhaps embarrassment can be avoided. Perhaps failure can be avoided. But life does not operate inside those calculations. Life responds to engagement. Think about the moments when you learned the most in your life. Was it during long periods of reflection, or during moments when you were forced to act? When something required movement from you, clarity arrived quickly. Reality corrected your assumptions in real time. Action sharpens perception. When a man remains in thought, the mind invents endless scenarios. Each scenario demands further analysis. The path forward becomes more complex with every new possibility. Eventually, the man feels overwhelmed by options that do not even exist yet. Overthinking is often motion trapped inside the mind. Stop waiting. Start moving. Your life will not fix. Itself exposes this trap. Movement simplifies what thought complicates. The moment you act, most imagined obstacles disappear. The few that remain become real problems that can be solved. There is a sentence worth remembering. Clarity follows motion. A man who begins walking learns the terrain quickly. A man who studies the map forever never feels the ground under his feet. History has already shown this difference between thinkers and movers. The men who shape their lives do not wait until every variable is known. They move, observe, adjust, and continue moving. Their understanding deepens through contact with reality. Meanwhile, the man who waits for certainty often finds himself years later in the same place, holding plans that were never tested. The title leaves no room for this illusion. Stop waiting. Start moving. Your life will not fix. Itself is a recognition that clarity is not something you receive before action. It is something life reveals once you begin. Lesson 4. Stop waiting. Start moving. Your life will not fix. Itself becomes uncomfortable when a man begins to notice how hesitation disguises itself as preparation. The mind is clever. It rarely says, "I am afraid to begin." Instead, it produces a more respectable explanation. It says, "You are preparing." Preparation sounds disciplined. It sounds intelligent. A man researching, planning, organizing, refining his approach appears responsible. From the outside, it even looks like progress. But there is a quiet line where preparation stops serving action and begins protecting delay. Most men never notice when they cross it. They continue adjusting small details, reading one more source, watching one more explanation, thinking through one more scenario. Each step feels reasonable, yet the action itself never arrives. Weeks pass inside preparation, then months. Eventually, preparation becomes a permanent state. The dangerous part is that it feels productive. The mind receives the same small reward it would receive from real movement. There is activity, there is effort, there is engagement. But nothing has entered the world yet. Preparation can become motion without consequence. A man tells himself he must learn more before starting the business. He must organize his schedule before starting the training. He must find the perfect words before having the conversation. Each reason sounds responsible, but underneath it is a quieter motive: avoiding exposure. The moment action begins, reality becomes involved. Results appear. Feedback appears. The possibility of failure becomes visible. As long as a man remains inside preparation, he stays protected from that exposure. No judgment, no mistakes, no friction. Just the comfortable belief that he is almost ready. But time does not recognize almost. Time only recognizes movement. History has already tested this pattern. The men who build, change, repair, or transform their lives rarely begin in perfect condition. They begin while imperfect. They begin while uncertain. They begin before they feel completely prepared, because preparation has a natural limit. Past that limit, it becomes hesitation wearing respectable clothing. Look at the areas of life where you tell yourself you are preparing. Ask a simple question that most men avoid. If preparation truly ended today, what action would you take tomorrow morning? The answer usually appears immediately. The conversation, the decision, the first attempt. The mind already knows the step. It simply prefers the safety of preparation over the exposure of motion. There is a sentence worth remembering here. Preparation ends where movement begins. Stop waiting. Start moving. Your life will not fix itself forces a man to confront this boundary. Planning is valuable. Thinking is valuable. Learning is valuable. But none of them change a life until something leaves the mind and enters reality. And reality does not respond to preparation. It responds to action. The moment a man understands this, preparation loses its power to delay him. The map remains useful, but the feet begin to move. And once they do, preparation becomes something different. It becomes adjustment, not avoidance. Lesson 5. Stop waiting. Start moving. Your life will not fix itself. Eventually confronts a moment that most men quietly resist. The moment when action must begin before readiness arrives. Readiness feels important. It feels responsible. A man believes he should wait until he feels mentally prepared, emotionally stable, confident in the outcome. But readiness is rarely the condition that produces movement. More often, movement produces readiness. Think about the first time a man enters unfamiliar territory. The first day in a new role. The first serious attempt at something that matters. Confidence is rarely present at the beginning. Instead, there is tension, uncertainty, a heightened awareness that mistakes are possible. This discomfort is not a signal to wait. It is the price of entry. Most men misunderstand this moment. They interpret the tension as proof that they are not ready. They assume confidence must appear first and action will follow. But life rarely arranges itself in that order. Confidence is built in motion. A man who waits for readiness is often waiting for the removal of discomfort. But discomfort is not a problem to eliminate. It is a condition that accompanies growth. When a man begins something that stretches him, his mind immediately encounters unfamiliar terrain. The body tightens. The thoughts become cautious. The voice inside his head asks whether this was the right decision. But that voice fades once movement continues. History has proven something simple about human capability. The mind adapts quickly to repeated action. What felt uncertain yesterday begins to feel manageable tomorrow. What felt intimidating last month begins to feel ordinary next year, but only if movement begins. A man who refuses to move until he feels ready never gives his mind the chance to adapt. He remains outside the experience that would have built his readiness in the first place. This creates a strange trap. He waits for readiness. Readiness waits for action. Neither arrives, and life remains unchanged. There is a sentence worth remembering. Readiness is built in motion. Look at the men who appear naturally confident. From the outside, they seem comfortable under pressure. They speak clearly. They act decisively. But what appears natural is usually the result of repetition. They have entered situations before. They have acted while uncertain. They have experienced mistakes and survived them. Over time, the tension that once felt overwhelming became familiar. Familiarity reduced fear. Movement strengthened control. But the first step for them looked no different than it does for anyone else. It began with uncertainty. Stop waiting. Start moving. Your life will not fix itself requires a man to accept something simple but uncomfortable. The feeling of readiness is not a requirement for action. It is a byproduct of it. A man who waits for courage often waits forever. A man who moves despite discomfort discovers that courage quietly grows behind him. And once he sees this pattern clearly, something shifts in how he interprets hesitation. Discomfort no longer looks like a stop sign. It looks like the doorway. Lesson 6. Stop waiting. Start moving. Your life will not fix itself becomes clearer when a man finally understands something uncomfortable about motivation. Most men believe movement begins with a feeling. A surge of energy, a burst of inspiration, a moment where everything inside them suddenly aligns. But motivation is an unreliable visitor. It arrives when life is already moving well. It appears when a man feels strong, focused, confident. In those moments, action feels easy. The gym session happens naturally. The work begins without resistance. The discipline feels almost effortless. But those moments are temporary. Sooner or later, the energy fades. Fatigue appears. Doubt returns. The mind becomes quiet and heavy. And the man who relies on motivation suddenly feels stuck again. He tells himself he just needs to wait until the feeling returns. Days pass. Nothing moves. The mistake is subtle. He has confused a reward with a requirement. Motivation often appears after movement, not before it. It is the mind's reaction to progress, not the fuel that creates it. History has shown this pattern again and again. The men who accomplish difficult things rarely move because they feel motivated. They move because they have trained themselves to act without waiting for permission from their emotions. Emotion is unstable. Discipline is stable. Think about a morning when a man wakes up without energy. The body feels slow. The mind suggests staying comfortable. The familiar voice whispers that today is not the best day to begin. Tomorrow will be better. But tomorrow rarely improves through waiting. The man who moves anyway experiences something strange. The first minutes feel heavy. The first steps feel forced. But as movement continues, something begins to shift. The body warms, the mind clears. Resistance fades. The action itself creates the energy he thought he lacked. Movement generates momentum. A man who waits for motivation is standing still while life continues moving forward without him. A man who moves without motivation eventually discovers that motivation begins following him. There is a sentence worth remembering. Discipline begins where motivation ends. Look closely at the men who maintain strength over long periods of time. They do not depend on emotional peaks. They rely on structure, routine, decisions that were made long before the moment of action arrived. They remove the question, should I move today? The answer was already decided. Stop waiting, start moving. Your life will not fix. Itself demands this shift. It demands that a man stop negotiating with temporary emotions. Feelings change hourly. Discipline remains when feelings disappear. A man who understands this no longer asks whether he feels ready, inspired, or energized. Those conditions are unstable. They cannot be trusted to guide a life. Instead, he asks a simpler question: what needs to be done? And once that answer appears, movement begins whether motivation has arrived or not. Because life does not reorganize itself around a man's emotional state. It responds to motion. Lesson 7. Stop waiting. Start moving. Your life will not fix itself reveals something most men never experience until they finally act. Strength often appears only after the first step. Before movement, the mind imagines weakness. It studies all the ways the attempt might fail. It calculates embarrassment, rejection, mistakes, resistance. The man feels small in comparison to the challenge because everything exists only in thought. Thought magnifies difficulty. Reality rarely does. This is why the first step feels so heavy. Not because the action itself is impossible, but because the mind has been carrying it for too long. Every day of hesitation adds weight to the moment of beginning. The step becomes symbolic. It begins to represent identity, reputation, pride. But the moment movement begins, something unexpected happens. The problem becomes real instead of imagined. Real problems have edges. They can be touched, measured, adjusted. Imagined problems expand endlessly. Action shrinks fear. A man who has never entered the situation assumes he lacks the strength to handle it. But the mind is a strange instrument. It hides capacity until it is required. Only when pressure appears does the body and mind begin revealing what they can actually do. Time has proven this pattern repeatedly. Men often underestimate themselves before action and understand themselves only afterward. Think about moments in life when something forced you to move, perhaps a difficult conversation, a responsibility that suddenly landed on your shoulders, a decision that could no longer be delayed. Before the moment arrived, hesitation felt heavy. But once the situation began, the mind adapted quickly. Words appeared, decisions formed. Strength emerged from somewhere that had been invisible minutes earlier. Where did it come from? It was already there. But strength rarely announces itself while a man is standing still. It appears when the environment demands it. Movement forces the mind to organize itself. The body responds. Focus sharpens. Capacity reveals itself under pressure. There is a sentence worth remembering. Strength appears in motion. A man who waits believes he must possess strength before beginning. A man who moves discovers that beginning is what activates it. Stop waiting. Start moving. Your life will not fix itself requires accepting this uncomfortable truth. No amount of thinking will reveal what you are capable of. Capability becomes visible only through action. The man who hesitates studies his limits in theory. The man who moves discovers his limits in reality. And reality is often far less restrictive than the imagination that preceded it. Look at the men who carry heavy responsibilities with quiet control. From the outside, they appear composed, even naturally strong. But their strength was not present before life demanded it. It was built inside the moments they once feared entering, step by step, decision by decision, pressure by pressure, until eventually, movement itself became normal. And the strength that once felt distant became part of who they were. Lesson 8. Stop waiting. Start moving. Your life will not fix itself also changes something deeper than productivity. It changes the structure of a man's mind, because doubt feeds on stillness. When a man remains inactive, the mind has too much empty space. Thoughts begin to multiply without resistance. Questions appear faster than answers. Every possible outcome is analyzed before any real experience has occurred. Overthinking is not intelligence. It is motion trapped in the mind. The more a man waits, the louder the internal noise becomes. One idea argues with another. One possibility cancels the next. The mind tries to simulate reality without ever touching it. Soon the man feels overwhelmed by scenarios that do not even exist yet. Nothing has happened, yet everything feels complicated. This is why hesitation slowly breeds doubt. The mind begins questioning every ability, every plan, every direction. Confidence fades, not because the man has failed, but because he has not acted. Stillness magnifies uncertainty. Movement disrupts it. The moment action begins, the mind is forced to redirect its energy. Attention leaves speculation and moves toward the task itself. The body engages. The environment responds. Problems become specific instead of abstract. And specific problems can be solved. Imagine a man sitting alone, thinking about a difficult conversation he must have. Hours pass inside his head. He imagines rejection, conflict, embarrassment. His heart rate increases, even though nothing has happened. The mind convinces him the situation is larger than he can handle. But the moment the conversation begins, something changes. Words replace speculation. The situation becomes real, not imagined. The mind organizes itself quickly because it must. Action restores clarity. Time has already proven this pattern countless times. Men who remain inactive often believe they lack confidence. In reality, they lack movement. Their mind has been left alone with its own doubts for too long. The mind, without action, becomes its own opponent. There is a sentence worth remembering. Movement silences doubt. This does not mean problems disappear when a man acts. Reality still contains resistance. Conversations can be difficult. Decisions can carry consequences. Effort remains necessary. But movement removes the fog that hesitation creates. Stop waiting, start moving. Your life will not fix. Itself reveals that action is not only about changing external circumstances. It restructures the internal landscape of a man's mind. Noise begins to fade. Attention becomes sharper. Energy becomes focused. Because the mind was designed for engagement, not endless speculation. A man who lives in thought alone slowly becomes trapped inside his own questions. But a man who moves begins receiving answers from reality itself. And reality has a way of simplifying what the mind once made impossible to untangle. Once motion becomes part of a man's daily life, overthinking begins to lose its authority. Not because the questions disappeared, but because action finally gave them somewhere to go. Lesson 9. Stop waiting. Start moving. Your life will not fix. Itself eventually reveals a deeper shift that few men anticipate. Action does not only change circumstances, it begins to reshape identity. A man often thinks of himself through the evidence of his past, what he has done, what he has avoided, what he has delayed. Over time, these patterns quietly build an internal definition of who he believes he is. If he hesitates often, he begins to see himself as someone who hesitates. If he delays decisions, he begins to see himself as someone who postpones. If he avoids discomfort, he begins to believe discomfort is something he cannot handle. Identity forms from repetition. The danger is that waiting becomes part of that repetition, and each day of stillness confirms the same silent message inside the mind. This is who I am. Not because the man lacks ability, but because his behavior keeps reinforcing the same pattern. The mind watches his actions and builds conclusions from them. Eventually, those conclusions feel permanent. But identity is less rigid than most men assume. It changes when behavior changes. The first action does not immediately transform a man, but it introduces something powerful: contradiction. When a man who has been waiting suddenly moves, even once, the mind receives new evidence. He spoke when he normally stays silent. He began when he normally delays. He moved when he normally hesitates. That single action begins to challenge the old identity. The mind no longer has perfect proof that the previous pattern defines him. A small fracture appears in the belief that he is incapable of movement. Action interrupts the story a man tells himself. Time has proven this again and again. The men who eventually transform their lives rarely do it through long periods of reflection alone. Reflection can expose the problem, but it cannot rewrite identity. Behavior does that. A man who moves repeatedly begins accumulating new evidence, small decisions, small efforts, small acts of discipline. Each one adds weight to a new internal narrative. Not a dramatic one, just a quiet adjustment. I move when something needs to be done. There is a sentence worth remembering. Action writes identity. This is why the title carries such weight. Stop waiting. Start moving. Your life will not fix itself is not only about solving problems in the external world. It is about interrupting the internal identity that waiting slowly builds. Because the longer a man lives in hesitation, the more natural hesitation begins to feel. But the moment movement becomes a habit, something powerful begins to shift. The man no longer debates every step. Motion becomes familiar. Effort becomes normal. Responsibility becomes something he carries rather than avoids. And once that identity begins forming, something interesting happens. Waiting starts to feel foreign, almost uncomfortable, as if the man has outgrown the version of himself who once believed life would eventually move on his behalf. Lesson 10. Stop waiting. Start moving. Your life will not fix itself ends with a realization that many men resist for years. Nothing in life reorganizes itself simply because time passes. Time moves forward, but it does not repair direction. It does not build discipline. It does not solve problems that require a decision. It only carries a man further along whatever path he is already walking. If the path is motion, time multiplies progress. If the path is waiting, time multiplies stagnation. Many men live quietly inside the belief that things will eventually improve, that circumstances will change on their own, that clarity will appear if they think long enough, that the right moment will arrive without being created. But life rarely rearranges itself to rescue hesitation. Instead, it reflects behavior. A man who waits often wakes up years later inside the same patterns he once promised to escape, the same routines, the same frustrations, the same unfinished intentions that once felt temporary. Nothing dramatic happened. He simply waited while time continued moving. This is why the title is not dramatic. It is direct. Stop waiting. Start moving. Your life will not fix itself is a recognition of how life actually behaves. It responds to motion, not hope. Hope without action is quiet permission for nothing to change. Look closely at men who eventually transform the direction of their lives. From the outside, their progress can appear sudden. A career shift, a stronger body, a clearer purpose. A life that looks disciplined and controlled. But the visible result hides something simple. They began moving earlier. While other men waited for certainty, they accepted friction. While others searched for the perfect moment, they used the available one. While others studied the distance ahead, they took the first step under their feet. And once that step existed, the next one became possible. There is a sentence worth remembering. Life rewards motion. This does not mean movement is always comfortable. It rarely is. Effort carries fatigue. Decisions carry consequences. Progress carries responsibility. But stillness carries something heavier. Regret. Regret grows slowly, quietly. It does not appear in a single moment. It accumulates in the spaces where action never happened, in the conversations that were avoided, in the opportunities that passed while a man debated whether he should begin. And once time has moved far enough, those spaces cannot be recovered. Stop waiting. Start moving. Your life will not fix itself is not an attack on hesitation. It is a correction to a dangerous illusion. The illusion that life will eventually fix itself if a man simply waits long enough. Life does not move for him. It moves with him or without him. If this message found you at the right moment, subscribe to the channel. This space is for men who are done negotiating with hesitation and ready to confront reality with discipline. And leave a comment below. Not a long explanation, just a sentence. What is one thing you have been waiting too long to start?